Welcome to the Future is Foster podcast, powered by Raise a Child. I'm your host, Nancy Mogi. I was adopted at 17, and I'm ready to talk all things foster and adoption. Someone has to.
This week, we are joined by Michael Bowler, an award-winning author, educator, and children's rights advocate, and most importantly, a foster-to-adopt father to Ronald. Starting his career as a teacher, he uplifted kids with disabilities and uses passions for writing to show young people they are not alone in their struggles. When he's not writing, Michael mentors youth with Big Brothers Big Sisters and volunteers in the juvenile justice system in Los Angeles to ensure everyone he meets feels heard, seen, and supported. Michael's goal as an author is to empower teens and uses his work to emphasize that we're better off doing what's right rather than what's easy. Hello, everyone. My name is Nancy Mogi, and welcome back to the Future is Foster podcast. I'm your host, and I was also adopted at 17 years old. And since then, I have made it my life mission to share as many stories about the foster to adoption system to spread awareness and recruit more foster parents, and most importantly, normalize the conversation about family. And today, that would not be possible with the amazing guest I have with me. He is an award-winning author. He is an educator. He is a mentor, and his most prized title is he is a foster to adopt father. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Mr. Michael Bowler.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
Of course, of course. Your reputation exceeds you. At Raise a Child, the organization that connected us, I was like, I need foster to adopt parents that will sit in front of a camera and represent how amazing the adoption process is. And they're like, you need to talk to this guy. This is him. This is the interview he did. And then I scoured the internet of all the work you've done. And I was like, wow, like he's not only an amazing father, you've dedicated your lives to teaching, uplifting youth, and using all of these amazing stories through your writings to uplift young people as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
But perfect. You know, I know a little bit about who you are, but I want to take it all the way back to how this all got started, how you ended up on this chair. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and your relationship with your family.
Oh, I'd say overall I had a pretty good relationship with my family, but I was born with hearing loss. And at that time, I had what they call sensory neural hearing loss, very high frequencies I wouldn't hear. And there were no hearing aids that worked for me. And no one else in the family had that, and no one at school. I didn't know anyone who was hard of hearing. And that kind of set me apart. It sort of made me different than all the other kids.
You knew what it felt like to kind of be outcast
I did.
in a way.
I felt like I was different. It was hard for me to be in groups. I couldn't go to big, loud school events. I couldn't hear anything. So I was something of an outcast. And so I've always sort of gravitated to those kinds of kids that other people tend to push to the side.
Absolutely. Wow, that's really great. Just you being able to acknowledge that and you being able to use your past experience of like, okay, now I want to navigate into doing acts of service and uplifting my community. So how'd you get started with deciding you wanted to help people or children that were pushed aside?
Well, I was in school to get a teaching credential. I already had a master's in like film and television. I'd made some low-budget horror movies and that sort of thing. But I wanted to teach, so I was getting a teaching credential. And I happened to see a little blurb in the church bulletin about they needed volunteer big brothers to work with boys who had no father in the home. Yeah. And so I started that in 1983. And I was matched to a boy who was also hard of hearing, had been born hard of hearing. And we had a lot of connections. And oddly enough, it was as revelatory to me as it was to him.
It's healing.
Because he could tell me experiences he had in school. And I said, I had the same thing happen to me. But no one else understood that. No one I'd ever met had ever understood that. So it was quite an experience. And then I ended up with several other little brothers who were also hard of hearing. So it was really an important connection that we had.
You brought up a really important point that it was obviously revolutionary for him to be able to have a support system. But for you, after all those years of moments where you were in classrooms, you're in big groups, where you had those struggles that no one could relate to you, you were finally able to find people people that not only related to you, but you guys were able to help each other. And I think that's the whole point of Big Brothers and Big Sisters. It's a dual growth, friendship, relationship. And that's amazing. Absolutely.
No, it really is. And, I used to my parents would do it too. Everyone would forget that I was hard of hearing. It's invisible.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many times I heard, you can hear me when you want to. And I'd say, but I heard, but I didn't understand. And they didn't understand that. So when I was teaching high school, I started teaching general ed. But then they had me substitute all the time for special ed classes and kids with learning disabilities, which are invisible. And I thought, I can really relate to these kids.
Yeah.
And so I ended up drifting into teaching special ed students.
Wow. And as you were teaching these special ed students, I'm sure you were able to realize, wow, there is a high demand of people that need to be a support system for them. Same way you needed that element of support system. Not saying your family wasn't a support system, but unless you know someone who has a specific disability or has something that they struggle with, no one else is going to know how to help them unless you had to receive that help yourself.
No, it's true. It's what's that saying about walking in the other person's shoes? I mean, and and when teaching with the special ed kids, and they would be in classes with general education teachers who didn't understand them,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm constantly kind of butting heads with them and say, look, you have to modify your instruction.
Doesn't mean they're stupid or not smart enough. It's just they're smarter or more smart in different ways.
Yeah, they understand differently and they learn differently. And then again, every student learns differently. And education is this one-size-fits-all model, which is a complete failure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we've kind of joked about it on our phone call before of, one of my biggest things was when I was in school, I was not only dealing with, a lot of emotional trauma at home, not having a stable home life. I also had ADHD, which I didn't even know till I was 20 years old. And I would constantly be getting in trouble for fidgeting, for talking, always trying to go to the bathroom, and always feeling like I needed to move. And it wasn't until I was in college when you're allowed to just get up to go to the bathroom, or you're in a working office and you're allowed to get up and do what you need to do, that I realized if I walk and I take a lap, or if I just stand up and go to a new environment, my brain instantly knows how to work again. It wasn't that I was being unruly. I just needed to do something to make my brain work a little bit differently. Same as you with your hearing.
And that, but I would try to teach that to some of the other teachers. I said, just, he can't sit still for 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's okay.
So send him down to the office to take the attendance. Have the kid do some errands for you. Can you help me with this? Anything, just to get that movement in there, just instead of sitting in a desk.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, totally. As I'm fidgeting in this chair right now while we're talking. So specifically, you were dedicating your life to being an educator. You saw this demand that people needed a support system. And you knew, okay, there was a part of you that spoke that you were ready to be a father. When did you realize that?
Well, I always loved kids. And it's funny because kids liked me. Even when I was a teenager, random kids come up and be talking to me. My family would say, who are these kids? So I don't know. They're just coming up and talking to me. But I think part of that was I didn't shoo them away like most older people or teenagers. Get out of here. I would listen to what they were saying. And I think they really appreciated that. Yeah. And I felt like I wasn't listened to enough as a child. So I always made it a point to listen. And that's why I became a volunteer also at juvenile hall. I worked with incarcerated youth. And that's what they needed the most. They needed someone to listen to them.
Not tell them what to do.
Not tell them what to do. Not judge them. Just listen. And go back and be consistent. And be patient with them. And compassionate. This is what they were lacking. And I originally, I think, really thought of adoption when I met a 7-year-old boy in juvenile hall who should not have been in juvenile hall.
How old were you when you started working with him?
I was mid-20s.
Got it. So you're like my age? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 25, 6, something like that. And he was a great kid, and I loved that boy. And he kept coming back through. He kept running away from foster homes or group homes, trying to find his mother, who we could never find because I don't know, they couldn't find her.
I mean, how do you explain that to a 7-year-old? Like,
Yeah.
sorry, your mom doesn't love you enough to stick around. You can't.
Yeah, you can't. And so I really, really thought, I really wish I could adopt this boy, but it was hard. I was working and I was teaching, and that's a full-time thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I could do it by myself. But I vowed then I'm going to adopt a child one day.
That's beautiful. And, something, even when I was starting this podcast and telling people of like our intended audience, and everyone was like, oh, well, do you think everyone that wants to watch it is going to adopt? And I was like, no, not everyone needs to adopt. I personally, I am in my mid-20s. I am in nowhere near right now able to foster or adopt an individual. I am not ready. I do not have the emotional strength or the time, and it is a massive commitment. One day in my life I will be, but right now I'm working on other things. And there are parts of me that feels guilty seeing, these foster kids that needs homes and, just like you're thinking about it. But most importantly, there was a spark that went off, like a bookmark, an internal bookmark of like, okay, we're going to come back to this and we're going to do something about it. So when did you decide like, okay, I'm ready. Now's the time to become a father?
Well, I finally figured I was getting too old. I'd better get to it. So that was like maybe 2015. And so that's when I attended an event that Raise a Child had. And I don't know how I found them, maybe on the internet. And it was an in-person event. And I did not know if I could even adopt as a single man. I didn't know.
Did you have any instances growing up that you saw other people adopt?
No, I don't think I didn't know anybody who had adopted. I knew single parents because I worked as a teacher. I worked with often single parents who had their kids, but I didn't know anyone who had adopted, and so it was completely new territory for me. But I found out, yes, I can adopt, and they had all of the foster family agencies there I'm sure they're all great. I went with one called Penny Lane because I knew of them from Kids in Juvenile Hall. And they were absolutely fantastic. I mean, they were fantastic. And, here I am.
They were the resource that you needed, the bridge, and Raise a Child. I'm so happy that they were able to connect you with Penny Lane as well and give you the awareness. Specifically, when you were talking about you were a single parent, you felt ready to be able to do it and take on the role of the standard 2 parenting role ordeal. But there is a very big stigma against single parents in general, whether they're adopting, whether they're fostering. And yes, it does make things harder to not have an immediate second person. But I'm sure, as we all know, we've seen a lot of families with 2 parents, and that doesn't mean that it's going to be an amazing family. Like you've shown with Ronald, is you're one parent, but you've been able to fill those holes and, reach out to family members and people around you to support him. And I hope people that are watching this, whether they're single or maybe they're thinking of leaving a relationship, but then that'll prevent them from having kids, it is possible and it is a commitment. But it doesn't mean that it could never happen. And specifically, I want to reroute back to when you initially started working with Penny Lane. When was the next step or the event that you had gone to of, okay, I'm ready to talk to some foster kids, when you knew you were qualified to?
Well, there was a child that they thought might be good for me. It was a 5-year-old, I think it was 5, which is a little younger than I was looking for. I was really looking for more school age, and that's basically kindergarten. But and he was an African-American boy who'd been in foster care since he was born, I guess. So, and we were ready to move forward with that. I said, okay, I want to move forward with this. But then, I don't know, some grandmother or great-grandmother or somebody was found in South Carolina or another state. And that was the end of that. They closed his case.
Did you ever hear about him?
No, never heard another word. And then there wasn't anything else for a long time until I went to this in-person Department of Children and Family Services event at a bowling alley. And my name is Bowler, which is ironic. But and they had children there, all of who were not going to be reunified with their parents. They were available to be adopted, and they were different ages. And we could interact with them a little bit as they were bowling.
Did the kids know, like, oh, maybe this is someone that might adopt you? Or did they just think it was a fun event?
No, they knew.
They knew.
They knew. And they were all really good kids. But some of them were sibling sets. I was not looking for that. I was looking for one child. And
you knew your limit of your, what you were capable to handle.
I had bunk beds in the house, but I thought I want to start with one because I just feel like that can be a challenge. I knew from working with kids, it can be a real challenge.
One's already a lot, definitely.
Right. And I don't want the two of them feeding off of each other being negative. I'd rather just get one, work with one kid. So there were 3 8-year-olds there, and one of them was this boy, Ronald. And there, I guess, was a staffing event afterwards. And I had put the 3 8-year-olds down on my interest list, and they matched me to Ronald. They felt he needed one person. That's what he needed.
Can you describe to us your first time meeting Ronald? Because you had to write down the name of, I think I would match well with this child. What was he acting like at the bowling alley?
Oh, he was all that, as they say. He was like, I know what I'm doing. I don't need any help with anything. And he was a tiny little 8-year-old,
He probably had to parentify himself his whole life.
Yeah.
He didn't have a parent, so he had to be his own parent.
He was very self-assured and self-confident. But honestly, there were 3 8-year-olds. They were the youngest ones. The rest were older. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to put the 3 8-year-olds down. Even though I interacted with all 3 of them, and they were all fine. I didn't know which one I would get.
Mm-hmm.
But
interesting too that you said 8-year-old, because almost everyone I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, I'll foster or adopt, but it has to be a baby because I don't want them to be years old with trauma and to be, aware of what's going on. But you didn't want to do the newborn route.
No, and it's interesting you say that, because they told me at Penny Lane, my social worker said, by 8, most of those children are not considered adoptable. Like you said, people don't want them. And I thought, how can they not want these kids? They're young children.
Yeah.
But apparently that's the mentality among a lot of people
stigma.
Who want to adopt. Yes. And you're right. I think they think they're going to have so much baggage. It'll be so difficult to work with.
So you met Ronald at the bowling alley. And you saw this kid that knew exactly what he wanted to do. No one was going to change his mind. He was very self-assured. That would have probably deferred a lot of parents that a kid had such a strong head on their shoulders, maybe to a point that, maybe it would be a little bit harder to parent them because they were so self-assured. But to you were like, no, that's the kid that I, see myself being able to have the best bond with, and you being able to help him grow as much. So once you found out that it was a match with Ronald, what was the next step?
Well, then I guess his social worker would talk to my social worker from Penny Lane and kind of gave him a little more information about his background. And
what was his background, if I can ask?
Well, he'd been, I finally think, permanently removed from his family when he was between 4 and 5, primarily for neglect. But then he'd been in several foster homes since then. So the one he was currently in, he'd been in for a year. And that was a very good one. They said he was very stable there. But he was a kid, they said he really wanted to be adopted. This is a kid who wants to be adopted, they told me. And I thought,
he wanted stability. He knew what he wanted. Kudos to him.
He really did know what he wanted. And so then the next step, we met with his whole team. And it's all these people, the social workers and...
probably a therapist.
Therapist, everybody. And they I guess it's part of their job. They try to make him sound like Jack the Ripper. I mean, they're going to get through all these things.
They don't want you to give up on him and give him back.
They want you to know that these are things that could show up and that they want you to be aware. And I've said, okay, that's fine. But it's fine. Let's go for it. I mean, they said, really? You don't want to think about it? No, I don't want to think about it. I said, let's go for it. I mean, I want to meet him. I want to see how it works. Mm-hmm. And so that was the next step.
And you definitely had the background of it. You were not only a teacher, and I'm sure every teacher that will watch this can say they've seen every kind of kid in the book. On top of it, you were working with special needs kids. You're working with kids that were in the juvenile system, at-risk youth. This was not your first rodeo at all of dealing with a kid that some people would view as troubled.
No, and I think what you mentioned about him being sort of very self-assured, I think that's that fear that some people have of an older child, like an 8-year-old. Well, he's not going to listen to me. But
not all 8-year-olds do.
And they don't anyway. I said, when is your 2-year-old going to do what you want? Or your 3-year-old? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what, it's so crazy. It's just, so to my mind, if you really want to be a parent and you love kids, I honestly wish more people would just take kids that are available in the foster care system, take them out of there, give them the permanent home, give them that stability and safety and compassion that they need and love. That's what they need.
That's what they need. And, we've been able to see, well, at least I've been able to see by keeping up with you and Ronald's story is how much his life has changed. You can just see the smile on his face in that courtroom of, I'm adopted, I have a dad, and I even had a lot of people tell me as soon as I was placed with the family, I had known them and gotten, fell in love with them, and I knew they were my forever family. But I had friends that I had known of like, wow, like you're doing so good. Like you seem so happy. You seem so healthy. Like you're eating, you're, gaining weight to be a healthy weight. And you can really see that when a child is in a loving and healthy home, that, nothing's not possible, with Ronald. You're seeing there's this amazing kid and you would think that, okay, you're approved, you passed all the tests, you've shown throughout your history that you are an amazing mentor and gonna be an amazing father. But biological parents do have some sort of a right for reunification services, even after social workers in the court has deemed them as unfit. So what kind of hurdles did you have to jump to really take that adoption to the finish line?
Well, as I said, his mother put forth some motions, or her attorney did, to the court that was able to delay it. One of them was maybe put him with his biological father, who we hadn't seen in so long he barely knew what he looked like.
Because that's not going to apply more trauma.
But the court agreed. So that means Penny Lane was required to set up, I think it was weekly visits with the father. So I had to bring Ronald over there. He showed up one time. And then he never showed up again for another visit. But we had to wait out like 6 months of that before anything could happen. So all of his time, and when Ronald first came to live with me, he thought, that's it. I'm done with foster care. Now I'm going to be adopted.
He, got so attached. He saw the life he was going to live, the amazing support system he had.
I mean, he was really upset when he found out he was still in foster care. And he had to do therapy and he had to do all of these things. He goes, I never asked for any of this. And he was crying, and we understood. I mean, but eventually he kind of settled in, but he was on a medication for ADHD. He goes, I don't want to be on the medication for ADHD. And I go, I agree with you. I don't think you need it. Mm-hmm. But that took 2 years, or I don't know, more than that, to get him off that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's frustrating for kids. The system is very difficult for children. And it's scary when they go into the court. I mean, I was there with him when he's going to court, and the judge doesn't even look at them.
Doesn't even talk to them.
They don't. I mean, I'm like, thankfully, I was very grateful. He had an amazing lawyer. He had a great lawyer.
Me too.
And that guy would take him aside and talk to him. And he was really good. He would talk to me too, which they don't have to do. Mm-hmm. But so it took a long time. So he came to me in 2017, and the adoption was finally finalized in January of 2020. And it was funny. He called me Michael all the way up. He never called me Dad until after the adoption. Then he knew it was a done deal, because I think he was smart enough. He'd been through the system long enough. He knew, I don't trust it. He said, I don't trust it until it's done.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him.
Smart. He's a very smart kid.
He's a smart kid.
Absolutely. Way beyond his years. I mean, he had to harden himself at such a young age. Ronald knew he was ready to be adopted. He, I'm sure, had an amazing connection with you from the start, because you were showing him safety, love, and compassion. And even through all the hurdles that the system may have put you through of dealing with his biological family. And I don't know his biological family, so I can't speak the worst of them. But what I can speak of is that he's so lucky. You guys are both so lucky to have been able to find each other and grow with each other. And just, it seems like you have been on a lifetime of adventures, even though you didn't, go into his life till he was 8 years old.
I told him, I said, I think we were destined to be together, because I realized that the date on which I bought my house, which was in 1993, was his birthday. Wow. And I told him, when I realized that, I said, look, there's a connection. I said, we had one before you were born.
That's beautiful. And as soon as you did go through, after the years, and especially years for Ronald, who went through this process longer than you did, how'd you celebrate? What did you do the first day he was adopted?
Well, we had my sister came down. She brought my nephew, who's in his 20s. They came down for the actual ceremony. My most recent little brother and his mom from the Big Brothers, they came to the court. And Rich from Raise a Child, Rich Valenza, who was the CEO, he came up. We were so happy to see him. We were so grateful to see him out there. It was amazing.
You had a community of
It really
people,
was.
and
It was
Ronald saw
beautiful.
he had a family.
It was beautiful. And then, so when we went home and he opened presents, he had presents. And, one that I got these 2 T-shirts that matched, and they were like Star Wars related. And one of them, mine said, "I am your father," and the other one said, "I am your son," which he opened up. And he gave me this big, huge laugh when he saw that. He just loved that. And so I asked him, I said, "Would you like to have a party, like an adoption party?" Because he's old enough to know. And he goes, "Yeah, I want to do that. And I want to have my friends over," because he made friends doing theater. He was doing Shakespeare theater. He was doing musical theater and at school. And he made friends. And I said, okay. So I created these invitations and he passed them out to the kids that he knew. And I invited like family. And a lot of people showed up for this event, and like 5 of his friends. And they had a great time out in the yard, playing Nerf wars and all kinds of stuff. And we had cake and a lot of food. It was a lovely afternoon. It was wonderful.
That was probably the first party he really ever had in his life about him.
That's the thing. He told me after everybody was gone, he said, "This is the second best day of my life after the adoption." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I've never had friends over anywhere I lived to play with." Now, that kind of broke my heart to think that he'd been all those years, he'd never had any, but it just made me so happy. And he was happy. And he had a forever home now. And he knew he could invite anyone over he wanted to play. And it was a wonderful experience for him. And
for you.
And for me, too. It was just beautiful. Everyone, and it was just so nice. So many people coming in who are part of my life. And we're excited to meet him and to see him and to have his friends. It was wonderful. So I would recommend that to anyone who adopts a child, who's, especially one that's older. Ask them if they'd like to do that, because they really might.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you, Michael, for coming in on your Saturday, sharing your story, adopting, being, a mentor for all of these. I know Ronald's just really your kid, but you had your little brother, you had all the people you've mentored, all the students you teached. And thank you so much for being such a change maker in this world. And the world's a very dark place, but people like you make it so much brighter.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of The Future is Foster. If you want to learn more about Raise a Child and Michael and Ronald's experience, feel free to click the link below. See you next time. Let's roll the credits. The Raise a Child organization for supporting foster youth. Max Fogelman, executive producer. Mike DeLay at Real Voice LA, audio engineer. Akash Gunver, editor and audio production. Georgie Christo, editor and short-form content specialist. Ahud Schechter, theme song producer. AdLarge Media for hosting and distribution. And to our listeners, thank you for making the future foster.